Hello. In recent months, there's been some helpful pushback against promoting gender ideology in education. Perhaps most significantly, in April, the highly regarded CAS review publicised some of the harms that have been done to children by allowing an ideology to override safeguarding. Much of its attention focused on the dispensing of trans drugs to children, a practice which Dr. Cass said was based on remarkably weak evidence. But more generally, it's also undermined the approach of automatic affirmation in schools. At the end of last year, the previous government produced helpful guidance on gender questioning children for schools in England, which steered schools away from the affirmation model. And then in May this year, its proposals to reform relationships, sex and health education, RSHE, included acknowledging gender identity is a highly contested subject which should not be taught, and teachers should not use materials claiming as fact that gender is a spectrum. If asked about the issue, it says that they should teach the facts about biological sex. However, last week, an Anglican charity that advises Church of England schools issued its own guidance, which many see as flying in the face of this new understanding of the risks around promoting gender ideology. Flourishing for All, anti-bullying guidance from the National Society, urges teachers to embrace up-to-date language on sexuality, sex and gender, and says they must challenge the use of outdated terms. With me to talk about the significance of this intervention into the gender ideology debate is the Institute's Head of Education, John Denning. John, thanks very much for joining me today. Well, John, at first glance, this is about combating bullying, which we all oppose. So why should anyone be concerned?
I think because of the approach that they've adopted to bullying. The whole approach is based on a kind of identity politics. It's a particular kind of social justice approach, which really emphasises protected characteristics, people's particular characteristics. So I attended a webinar on this new guidance, and they used, for example, this diagram here, where they're dividing everybody into different characteristics, talking about some having power, some being marginalised, and using that as a framework for the whole of the guidance.
Well, just talk us through then. What are we looking at here?
So it's saying that schools should try to understand bullying by looking at which of these characteristics different children have, which of these characteristics are marginalised and which are not marginalised.
So it's sort of creating a kind of hierarchy, is it, of if you have more of these kind of characteristics, you're more likely to be bullied, or you're going to suffer worse bullying, or...
That's right, yeah. And so the way to tackle bullying is to deal with this whole wheel of power and privilege. And that's really the framework for the whole of the guidance.
Okay. Just to pick on what you're saying there, I mean, people, we've all been through school, and we would probably recognise some truth in that, where particular kids, because of, my day might have been because you're wearing glasses or something, they would be more prone to be bullied. So isn't this a helpful thing?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a grain of truth in it. And of course, in anything like this, that there's a powerful idea that captures people's imagination, there's a grain of truth. Otherwise, people would ignore it. Of course, there's some truth in it. But it's really important to look at the actual evidence of bullying in schools. What are the reasons children are bullied? What are the I don't want to say reasons, but what are the excuses? Why are particular pupils targeted? And deal with the actual evidence, not base everything on a predetermined ideology.
Yeah, because this almost from the outset create some pupils turn some pupils into victims, yeah, and some other pupils into oppressors by definition. That's what it seems to do.
Exactly. Right. Yes, that's right. And then we want to sort of rebalance that by sort of bigging up those who are supposedly victims. And I think that's on a helpful message for children, actually, to label them as victims. But it's also, the other problem with it is it ignores a great deal of bullying that does go on in schools. It's this failure to actually look at the evidence, and it's a triumph of ideology over evidence. So this is actually just the first part of a 5-volume series on bullying for schools that is coming out. Right. So if we look at the slide here, it outlines what they're going to be doing. So we've got Part A and Part B that are currently out for consultation, and then we've got 4 others to come out. And as you can see, they're all...
HBT? What's HBT?
So HBT, homophobic, biphobic and transphobic bullying.
Okay. Right.
Then bullying on the basis of race, bullying on the basis of special needs, disability, religion and belief, and then sexist bullying and sexual harassment. But there are important issues, of course, in all those. We don't want any child to be bullied in school for any of those reasons. But it's just not true to suggest that those are the only reasons that children are bullied, or even the majority of children that are bullied.
Yes, I mean, for instance, I'm not sure where the glasses wearing fits into that, perhaps. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it is important, I think, that we actually look at the evidence, and that the guidance encourages schools to look at what's going on in their schools and tackles the actual problems in their school.
Well, tell us then. So, what is the evidence for bullying in schools?
So if we look at national surveys, to be fair to the Church of England, they do have an appendix where they've done a little bit of research. So they've got an appendix where they've asked children in secondary schools, I think, Church of England secondary schools, why people are bullied, and we've got this pie chart, and it is showing a significant number of people think other peoples are bullied for being gay, for example, 26%, 60% disability, 40% the skin colour. Even that survey leaves a significant number that aren't one of those groups.
Sorry, so these are people saying why they have been bullied, or this is a survey of people saying why we think that people may be bullied?
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the second of those. And of course, children who are asked about this, they want to give the right answer. If they've had lots of teaching about HBT bullying, they probably might bias them towards emphasising that. If we look at other research into this, so this is research here from the Department for Education in 2015, a little bit of a long time ago, but it's a solid study. You can see large proportion bullied because of looks, large proportion just don't know why they were bullied. These aren't really reasons for bullying, these are excuses for picking on somebody, aren't they? Disability, homosexuality, skin colour and ethnicity do feature, but a minority. Or a more recent survey here, we have one from the charity Ditch the Label, which works on bullying. This is a bit different. This is specifically asking those who have been bullied in the last 12 months. So those who say they have been bullied in the last 12 months, why they think they were bullied. You can see these figures don't actually add up to 100%. So there might be more than one reason.
Bullied for more than one reason.
You can see 47% attitudes towards my appearance, things like wearing glasses, but other things as well. 30% attitudes towards my interests or hobbies,
which wasn't covered at all.
Which wasn't. No, exactly. So these major things aren't covered at all in this whole series of guidance from the Church of England. 24% because of something I did. 22% being called gay, lesbian when I'm not. 11% attitudes towards my sexuality. So that does come in there, but it's not the major thing. Of course, that should be addressed.
Okay, but this guidance is focused on protected characteristics, hasn't it? So it could have gone for lots of other things, but it's focused on protected characteristics. And the guidance talks about schools' legal duties, particularly in relation to the Equality Act. And so it would be argued, wouldn't it, that, schools need to base their approach on protected characteristics because that's what the law requires them to do. That's what it would be argued. That's not entirely true, though, is it?
Yeah, that's certainly what the guidance suggests. It talks extensively about the Equality Act, and that's really its starting point legally for discussing schools' legal duties in this area. But there's some obvious problems with that. First of all, the Equality Act was passed in 2010.
Yeah.
It's not as if before that schools had no legal duty to deal with bullying.
Yeah.
For example, if you go back to the Education Act 2002, Section 175 talks about schools' legal duties to protect children, to look after their well-being, their duties to follow statutory safeguarding guidance, and that's really it's that duty of care that schools have for every child, irrespective of whatever characteristics they may have. It's that duty of care for every single child. That's a starting point. And yes, the Equality Act may have some relevance, but it's not the foundation for everything. So again, you can see this guidance is trying to found everything in the protected characteristics rather than in the
welfare
duty
of the child,
welfare of every child. That's
okay.
Right.
So really what you're saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what you seem to be saying is that this guidance essentially distorts schools' duties towards the welfare of children.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it does, and I think that's in fact dangerous and potentially harmful, because it's allowing this particular ideology to shape the school's approach rather than allowing the evidence to shape the approach. And that can lead, in a very obvious point, it can lead to the school ignoring a great deal of bullying that does take place because it doesn't happen to line up with the ideology. Schools are going to have 5 volumes of this guidance to read. This one was nearly 60 pages long. They're going to be setting up, if they follow the guidance, they're going to be setting up all sorts of processes and procedures to identify HBT bullying, faith-based bullying, race-based bullying, all these types of bullying, categorize them, prioritize them, address them. They're probably going to be engaging in some preventative actions. So this is not just about dealing with bullying after the event. It's also about teaching pupils. And that's entirely appropriate. I think schools have an important part of the school's work on bullying is to be preventative, to teach them to be kind to one another, not to target others because they're different.
Yeah.
But because that difference is all understood in terms of this hierarchy and these protected characteristics.
And only certain characteristics that a person exhibits,
all the attention goes to them. And there's also a real risk that that will distort what the school actually teaches on issues of sexuality, on issues of gender, because those are seen now within the school's teaching in terms of this hierarchy, in terms of these protected groups. Okay,
so in my introduction, I talked about some recent movement against this sort of approach. And the CAS report is very good on this. Didn't directly deal with schools, but it did talk about the significance of schools in this whole area of particularly on gender ideology, which is, I guess, what CAS was there to talk about. Can you connect what some of the things that the CAS report says to what this guidance says?
Yeah, so the CAS review actually does say the importance of schools cannot be underestimated. Often it's in schools that children have been transitioning, and that's where, as transitioned and being affirmed as transitioned, that's where they get that social affirmation from, which in the interim report, the CAS interim report, says that's not a neutral act. And then I think in the final report goes a little bit further in drawing attention to that and saying, that children before puberty, they shouldn't be transitioned within schools unless there's real clinical input into that decision.
It was a really significant shift away from that whole pro-affirmation model, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. And the reason Cass is saying that is because she's emphasising the importance of following the evidence and paying attention to the evidence. And she says we've had this social justice model which has influenced the medical profession and how this has been dealt with in medicine. And what she's pointing back to is actually what we should be doing is having an evidence-based approach in medicine. But I'm afraid the Church of England is making exactly the same mistake in this guidance. It's all being based on a particular kind of social justice model rather than looking at the evidence. That's true for the evidence of bullying, but there's also a risk that then this ideology gets promoted in the teaching. And as you said in the introduction, we're provided here with a glossary at the back. That includes things like the definition of a transgender man is a man who was assigned female at birth but identifies and lives as a man. Well, when a baby girl is born, no one assigns that baby girl a female gender. What happens is the midwife recognises this is a girl. In fact, parents probably already know from the scan that they're having a girl, and then records the sex. That's what the birth certificates record, the sex as female. So the idea that this person who was assigned female at birth is pure ideology. It's not fact. It's not what actually happened. And now we're being told this person who identifies as male is a transgender man, and that's just stated as fact in the glossary. And then
which contradicts the guidance that the government, the previous government, had put out, which is saying exactly not to do that.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. That's right. So the definitions and the language that's being used is implying affirm the child. If they say they're male, well, then they were just assigned female at birth, but they're not actually female. Well, even though their biology is female, they are a man or they are a boy. And within the body of the guidance, schools are instructed to challenge the use of outdated language and are directed to this glossary. So,
which suggests that biological reality is outdated and we shouldn't use that kind of terminology.
Exactly. It does refer to that new guidance that you mentioned.
The gender questioning guidance?
The gender questioning guidance, yes, the gender questioning guidance. It does refer to that and talks about schools following that, but it doesn't really give us any detail on what's within that guidance, and then the rest of what it says seems to push
in the opposite direction. There seems to be a clash, doesn't there, between so following the guidance and following that, you might get into. That might be a difficult journey to a difficult path to walk.
Indeed, and this guidance came out the day after the general election, and of course we've now got a new government that needs to consider what to do about that gender and questioning children guidance. Right. Yeah. It went out for consultation some time before the election, but it's never been issued in its final form. Mm-hmm. It's up to the next government to decide what to do about that. So they have, if that changes, if what its content changes when it comes out, when it is finally issued, they're not committing themselves.
John, obviously this is a very contested area. I think everybody understands that. So how much room does this guidance give, or how much acknowledgement does this guidance give to that, and how much allowance is made for alternative views?
Well, it does acknowledge that there are different views within the Church of England. I mean, it says, that clergy who are supporting the delivery of the curriculum, they may end up being asked or end up discussing different views within the church. So that's certainly acknowledged. But the problem is, then there seems to be a really determined attempt to keep that out of schools. So although lip service is played to there being a discussion and acknowledgement of different views, what the guidance actually says is that when they're discussing differences that exist within the church, let alone wider society, it's critical that viewpoints which are homophobic, biphobic or transphobic are not presented, since to do so would be harmful to both pupils and adults.
Okay, so that sort of suggests, you just talked about the glossary and what it says about the glossary about what it means to be a transgender man, a man who was assigned female at birth but identifies and lives as a man, which we would challenge. There'd be plenty of people within the Church of England who would challenge that. So is there a danger then that someone who says, no, you are what you're not assigned a gender at birth, you are a biological sex is a reality. Is there a danger, if that sort of language is applied, that those views, gender critical views promoting biological reality, are classified as transphobic and then don't get a hearing?
I think that is exactly the danger. Yes. I mean, of course, there is a need for sensitivity in schools.
Of course, yes.
And even more so if you're talking as a teacher to an individual pupil. There is a great need for sensitivity and understanding. And certainly there shouldn't be any expression of hatred in school. If you read the guidance as meaning that, then fine. But of course, what people describe as homophobic, biphobic, transphobic can be almost anything they disagree with, really. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a really great danger that actually what this guidance is doing is paying lip service to there's a range of views within the church. But actually when it comes to schools, we're not going to say anything other than the position that's represented by some of that terminology in the appendix there.
Okay, so what can people do to make their views about this guidance known?
Well, this is draft guidance. It's not final guidance. There's been a short consultation window, but it is open for consultation. So if you go online, search for the Church of England and search for the title of the guidance, search for Flourishing for All, bullying guidance, you'll find that consultation and you can respond. So I think particularly people who work in education, especially those in Church of England schools, can respond to this and really, but it really needs to be a response that's responding to the detail of the guidance. You're going to need to read that guidance, understand how bullying works in schools, and then respond accordingly. But it would be really useful to do that.
So teachers in particular would be teachers in Church of England schools in particular would be very good to respond to.
Really encourage teachers in Church of England schools, governors of Church of England schools, but others who might be concerned can respond as well.
Excellent. Okay, John, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks.
For more great content, like, subscribe and hit the notification bell.